How do you feel about porn? If you use it, how do you feel about your habits? Does watching porn enhance your life and relationships, or change things up in a not-so-sexy way? Since starting Girl Boner, I have heard from many people with strong opinions about porn. People who love it and find it strengthening or empowering or just fun. People who create it or want to make changes in that industry. And from people who've struggled deeply with their relationship to it or the impact that it's had on their lives and well-being. Today you'll hear from the story of organic farmer and lifelong athlete.
Well, it's been the most unbelievable, unexpected, and beautiful journey for me. It didn't start out that way, but a few years ago, I first started experiencing the symptoms of erectile dysfunction.
Today, Brooke doesn't like using that word, dysfunction.
It creates a feeling of disempowerment and fear when there's nothing further from the truth. I was in a relationship and I was experiencing these symptoms at that time, and it really woke me up. I really had gone through a pornography addiction for decades. It started benignly with, when I grew up, it was seeing my dad's Playboy magazine the first time, or a snippet in a newspaper. That was what we had then. But today, it is a completely different world. It sort of grew with the evolution of pornography on the internet. So when it became more common on the internet and I became more familiar with virtual tools, it grew with that. And it started slowly, but it's a growing addiction. I think it was a process over a number of months or even years that I realized that I was not performing well. There was something wrong. There was actually something wrong with my neurology. I didn't know at the time. It was something that evolved slowly for me, that I started realizing I had an issue and I wasn't performing well. I wasn't getting aroused, and I was sort of pretending like I didn't want to have sex. I was actually inside terrified that I couldn't. But I noticed even with my masturbation, things were not working optimally.
And did you talk to your partner back then about your challenges?
I did not. It's a little embarrassing to say at the time, but later on I did. And once I started understanding what it was, and there's so much shame and taboo around what's supposedly organic erectile dysfunction. This is really largely neurological and energetic based ED.
He used the word supposedly there because when Brooke sought out help from a doctor, he was misdiagnosed. And as is often the case with misdiagnoses, the treatment he was offered was not helpful.
Later, I found out I had what's called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So this is a neurologically based form of ED. So I was essentially being misdiagnosed and misprescribed cardiovascular function ED when I didn't have a blood flow issue.
As Brooke points out, this type of scenario isn't uncommon. One study involving over 3,000 cisgender men looked at porn use and erectile dysfunction. The researchers found that 30% of the men under age 35 and 40% of the men aged 35 to 45 who watched 300 minutes of porn per week had diagnosable erectile dysfunction. The same research team found an even stronger link between porn addiction and ED. To assess porn addiction, a questionnaire is often used. One common one lists a true and false list with things like, "Sometimes I feel unable to control the watching of porn sites. I've continued watching porn despite some negative consequences, and I get sexually aroused only when I watch online porn." Brooke's experience mirrors those things. On top of his erection challenges, he was really struggling emotionally.
What I was suffering through was several enormous burdens. One of them was the scarlet letter of erectile dysfunction, which creates a feeling of humiliation and disempowerment and confusion. And at the time I was praying deeply to God. I've always been very spiritual, but especially at such a desperate time in my life. And I was praying for either a pharmaceutical or a natural drug which worked and didn't cause side effects. But my prayer was never answered. And I'm actually glad it wasn't, because it wasn't a very high bar I was setting. Also, the constant dopamine cycle of my addiction to pornography with the fatigue, mood imbalance, and distancing in the relationship. And then this added burden of the pharmaceutical side effects that came from the ED medications and their exacting and mechanical nature, and also the diminishing and failing effects of it. This all created such enormous burdens for me.
Instead of relief from his erection issues, Brooke ended up with those side effects. Some of the most common side effects of ED medications include body aches, headaches, digestive problems, and vision changes. Headaches are the most common side effect, and they stem from sudden changes in blood flow from high levels of nitric oxide. A European urology study showed that higher doses of these medications cause side effects about 22% of the time. The most intense part for Brooke, though, seemed to be the emotional toll of the whole experience.
I was falling into a depression for weeks at a time. It was a very scary time for me. I wasn't sure if or when I would come out of these cycles of depression. And when the last drug failed me, I was at the end of the road. And so I prayed for a healing miracle. Over and over, I prayed for a healing miracle. It was like leaning over the edge of a cliff and diving into the deep blue ocean below. I didn't know what was going to happen.
While he didn't realize it at the time, he was at the start of a journey of natural healing that he now advocates for. He's even written a book about his philosophies called You Are Not Broken, a holistic guide for men and women to heal the pathways of sexual dysfunction and restore relational harmony together. And he is deeply passionate about this cause. Things started to turn around for Brooke after he came upon the website Your Brain on Porn, created by the late Gary Wilson. It's described as a clearinghouse for the latest research media and self-reports on pornography's effects and potential harms. And it lists all of the latest studies about porn in the brain. Brooke said the site helped him see
the enormous power that our sexual behavioral choices have on either creating massive dysfunction or massive positive transformation in all areas of our life. We're now at the end of a 2-decade-long massive experiment on the minds and neurology of the global population. We're seeing the results now, and they are harrowing and they're terrifying. We're seeing young men and women unable to have the first sexual experience of their life and engage in any meaningful relationship. And I know men that have gone through this. My coach has gone through this.
Brooke believes that pornography is destroying our neurology, relationships, and ability to function normally as sexual beings. While some research supports this for certain people, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this topic. Many sex educators and therapists believe that porn itself isn't the root problem, but that a lack of comprehensive education about both porn and sex is. In either case, getting people the support and resources they need is inarguably important. I think everyone in these communities agrees with that. Currently, porn addiction is not recognized as an official diagnosis, although compulsive sexual behaviors is. And Brooke believes that needs to change.
We don't recognize pornography as an addiction. We would not expect a cocaine or morphine or alcohol addict to be able to relate optimally in a relationship, to be able to peak physical conditioning, to have all their mental and emotional acuity and perform well sexually, would we? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't expect that. But we do expect that because we're totally unaware and not classifying porn-induced erectile dysfunction the way it should be, as an epidemic addiction at the point it's at for a lot of men. They're actually not getting satisfied. As their dopamine levels crash and chi sexual energy crashes, they're actually pushing themselves further away from satisfaction, from their goals, from meeting real, beautiful, connected partners. And they're settling for a fantasy. They're replacing real life, real connected partners with pixels on a screen, pixel by pixel. And that's the whole thing. Letting go of this addiction is getting more into the dance, into the smelling the flowers, the process, rather than a singular goal-driven act.
Do you recall a time when you really noticed that you were getting better?
Well, it's interesting because there were sort of different elements to it. There was the sexual performance part, and then there was the actual mental and emotional aspects. Right away, within weeks, I was transforming massively. My mental acuity and my emotional balance was coming back, my creativity, my passion. It was like I was a whole different person. A total transformation that takes place by simply restoring the dopamine and the chi sexual energy that I had been depleted for decades and unaware of. When you quit this addiction and both those elements, you find out just how addicted and down in the dumps you were the whole time, diminished and deplenished and depleted. The sexual part took a little bit longer, and I had a lot of trauma around it still. I was still very insecure.
I really believe that healing takes however long it takes. Everyone's journey is different. I also think so many people who may be struggling want to know how long it'll take to get an erection again. Could you give some thoughts on timeline?
Well, that's a great question and a natural question because of the desperation. They want to know, when can I get this confidence and identity back? When can I get an erection? Well, it's not just about getting an erection. It's also about regaining vibrant relationships and new behaviors. We have to change these behaviors in order to holistically transform ourselves. It's a beautiful process that takes place, and we see ever increasing benefits taking place as we successfully go through this process of simply refraining completely from pornography and even similar virtual imagery, which includes women that are maybe not in pornography, but that are going to trip that dopamine hit again in us. We're trying to placate and to rebuild and rewire, resensitize our neurology. So basically, we want to look at recovering our neurology, and this takes place. I saw my own results, and this is very common. Within 3 to 6 months, I was seeing definite changes in my ability to get aroused, get an erection. And then really, I was sort of getting close to 100% after about a year, or at the worst, it could take a couple years. But we're so trained to want results. That's why we get, in the West, we're so addicted to getting a pill. So we want immediate results. So like you said, we want to be patient. It takes as long as it takes. And when you include your partner in this process, like I did, then you're not in a rush. Your partner is on board.
What would you say most helped you heal from the trauma around everything?
Well, for me, it was just a process of talking to myself, praying, meditating, and really just trusting that I'm safe now, that I have solutions, and that what I went through before, I don't have to go through anymore. I don't have to ever deal with pharmaceutical ED drugs again, and I don't have to ever feel that loss of confidence and identity again. Now that I have these solutions, all I have to do is focus on practicing them.
Brooke also practices things like eating a plant-based diet for managing and preventing erection issues. That can help by improving blood flow, which promotes both sexual and cardiovascular health. Since his spirituality plays such a big role in his life, I was curious how that had changed, if at all, over time. Was your relationship to God as strong before all of this?
That's a great question. I don't believe it was. I think that this has deepened it. I think that sometimes when we go through these really intense periods like this, it's a catalyst, it's an opportunity that we can seize to have massive transformation. And I've transformed on every level. I mean, I think it's hard to connect spiritually when you're in a dopamine addiction. So not just sexually, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally, relationally. I wasn't able to do any of that during those times, but now, yes, I have a very much closer relationship with God, and I communicate with God every day.
Given that Brooke sees his previous challenges as a full-on addiction, he has not gone back to porn.
This is an addiction. It's a dopamine addiction, and I have never gone back, and I never will. It's a complete lifestyle change. Basically, what we're doing is rather than watching our life spiral into fantasy and pulling us away from reality, we're actually choosing life, we're choosing reality, we're choosing real connected partners, real relationships, rather than this dopamine fantasy kick that we're getting from a virtual imagery, not even reality. It's all fantasy and virtual. Because of what I've gone through with the damage, the dysfunction, the trauma of this, fantasy of pixels on a screen, this addiction, I only choose healthy behaviors now. I choose to deepen relationships. I choose to get my satisfaction from real relationships and from healthy sexual behaviors.
Is there a piece of advice that you'd like to share related to all of this to people who might be listening to this and they're struggling themselves? What's in your heart to share for them?
So many things I'd like to share, actually. But I think it's to be willing to take a chance, to be willing to put your faith in a higher source, being willing to let go of your fears, to strip yourself bare of your addictions and your negative habits, the myths and misconceptions and peer pressure that are surrounding you. To lay that all bare, strip it bare, and follow your own heart and the science and what you know is best for you. Start making decisions that are best for your health,